When Pam Bondi called Jasmine Crockett Ghetto at 0:04 in front of millions, she wasn't prepared for the calm, devastating response that followed, one that would leave a lasting mark across the country. The bright lights blazed overhead, inside the San Diego Civic Center. You could feel the pressure thick in the air before a single word was spoken. It was one of those live panel discussions you just knew could spiral out of control. Fast. The topic: the Department of Justice's controversial new policies. Cameras rolled. People straightened their ties and skirts, holding their breath for the first blow. At the center of the long, curved table sat Pam Bondi, sharp suit, tighter smile. To her left, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, calm, composed, her hands folded neatly in front of her. You could tell she wasn't just ready to talk. She was ready for anything. The moderator, Monica Reyes, a seasoned journalist from Seattle, cleared her throat, giving a quick, neutral overview. Under Bondi's leadership, protections for journalists had been rolled back, opening the door for reporters to be subpoenaed over confidential sources once again. A controversial move, already sending shockwaves through newsrooms nationwide. Monica turned to Bondi first. Attorney General Bondi, can you explain the logic behind this reversal? Bondi leaned in, voice smooth, polished, courtroom perfect. We believe national security must come first. Shielding leakers under the guise of journalism cannot be tolerated, she said. A line so rehearsed you could almost hear the cue cards flipping. A few cautious nods from the audience, but just as many furrowed brows. Then Monica turned to Jasmine. Congresswoman Crockett, your response? Jasmine didn't rush. She glanced once at Bondi, then back to the moderator. Her voice was even, steady, but underneath there was a spark. When the government starts deciding who qualifies as a real journalist, we start walking a dangerous line. It's not about leaks. It's about silencing truth-tellers. The room shifted, a subtle but powerful current. This wasn't a soundbite. This was lived experience speaking. You could feel it. Pam Bondi's smile tightened, her posture stiffening. She didn't like being challenged, least of all by someone younger, sharper, and unbothered. Monica tried to steer the conversation back to neutral ground. Let's focus on the policy decisions, please. But the shift had already begun. The next question: how might the new policy affect minority journalists who already faced barriers to access? This time, Jasmine jumped in first. She spoke of how independent media had long been a lifeline for communities of color when mainstream outlets turned a blind eye. The truth, Jasmine said, locking eyes with the camera, has never needed permission to exist. And it sure doesn't need government approval. The energy changed. Respect, not fear, rippled through the room. But Bondi was bristling. She tapped. Her fingers impatiently leaned forward and, cutting Jasmine off mid-sentence, let it slip. You're so ghetto, she sneered, loud enough to echo through the Civic Center. Time stopped. The moderator's mouth fell open. A gasp rang out from the second row. Someone near the back muttered an expletive, and for one heart-pounding moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Jasmine blinked. Once, twice. She didn't flinch. She didn't shout. She didn't even look away. But in her eyes, a storm, anger, sadness, disappointment, and then something colder, sharper, clarity. She reached for her microphone, the entire room frozen, waiting. But instead of firing back with rage, Jasmine waited. She let the ugliness of Bondi's comment fill the space. Let it choke itself. She made sure everyone, in that room and watching at home, sat with it, felt it, saw it for exactly what it was. Pam Bondi sat upright, smug, for about 2 seconds too long, and then, the shift. Jasmine, still calm, tilted her head slightly, like she was deciding whether to correct a petulant child or simply let them wallow in their own ignorance. Her hands never moved. Her voice never cracked. She tapped one perfectly manicured nail just once against the table's polished wood, and in that silence, Jasmine Crockett didn't just win the room. She won the moment. She showed the entire country the real meaning of strength. It wasn't nerves, it was a decision being made. Monica Reyes, the moderator, fumbled for words. Let's keep things professional, she mumbled, hoping somehow the moment would slip past unnoticed. It didn't. 3 chairs down, a young reporter from Los Angeles, Rafael Dominguez, narrowed his eyes. His camera crew, sensing the gravity of what had just happened, zoomed in. Meanwhile, the live stream chat exploded. Did she really just say that? OMG, no way that just happened on live TV. Pam Bondi shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She could feel the energy bleeding away. But her pride kept her rooted. She crossed her arms like a schoolyard bully, daring someone to push back. Jasmine finally leaned forward, her voice low and steady, forcing the entire room to lean closer just to hear. Say that again, she said. Pam's smirk faltered. She muttered, something about people knowing what I mean, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. Jasmine took a deep breath. You could see it, the choice being made right there. The choice not to let anger script the next part of the story. When Jasmine spoke, her voice was clear, unshakable. I grew up in South Dallas, Pam. I went to public schools with textbooks, older than the teachers. I watched neighborhoods survive through creativity, through faith, through grit. If that's what you think ghetto means, then I'll wear it like armor. A small, genuine round of applause broke out from somewhere in the crowd. Not loud, not chaotic, but real. Bondi rolled her eyes again, muttering something about playing the victim card, but nobody was listening anymore. Jasmine straightened, her voice gaining strength. The problem isn't where I come from, she said. The problem is when people like you believe dignity, intelligence, and power only come in one package, and anything outside that must be mocked or dismissed. Now the clapping grew louder, more people rising to their feet. Not wild, not chaotic, measured, like a courtroom when the truth finally lands after hours of lies. Pam tried to jump in, her voice rising in desperation, but Monica Reyes, finally steady, held up her hand. Congresswoman Crockett has the floor, she said firmly. For the first time that night, Pam Bondi looked rattled. Meanwhile, Jasmine leaned forward again, locking eyes with the camera. And while we're talking about Ghetto, let's talk about transparency, about the reporters who risk their lives and sometimes for free to tell stories you'd rather bury. Let's talk about communities that are painted as problems, but survive as miracles. Let's talk about how power gets uncomfortable when it can't control the narrative. The auditorium erupted, this time with no hesitation. The walls seemed to vibrate with applause. Pam sat stiffly, gripping the edge of the table, searching for words that wouldn't sink her even deeper. Across America, people watched spellbound. The insult meant to break Jasmine Crockett had done the exact opposite. It built her up even higher. And the internet was moving faster than anyone could. Catch clips of the moment raw and unedited, exploded across Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook. No catchy music, no clever edits. Just truth unfiltered, slamming into a country worn thin by spin and hungry for something real. In coffee shops, dorm rooms, and front porches, people leaned forward, texting their friends. You have to see what just happened. But Jasmine wasn't finished, not even close. As the applause settled, the static of electricity still clung to the air. Pam Bondi sat stiff, arms crossed, jaw tight, suddenly small. For a heartbeat, it looked like she might recover, might throw out some pre-packaged rebuttal. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't going to give her the chance. She turned calmly to the moderator. May I continue? Her voice was smooth but carried a quiet authority no one dared question. Monica Reyes, almost grateful for the command, nodded quickly. Of course. Jasmine turned back to the audience, not just the people in the Civic Center, but the millions now watching from home. I want to be very clear, Jasmine said. When someone throws labels at you, especially labels meant to shame your roots, your voice, your existence. You don't shrink. You don't apologize. You stand a little taller. Every word landed like a hammer blow. Pam tried to mutter about personal responsibility, but this time Monica didn't even acknowledge her. Jasmine had the floor. Jasmine had the moment. And Jasmine had the country's attention. Monica motioned for Jasmine to continue, this time without interruption. Jasmine gave a small knowing smile, not gloating but daring Bondi to keep digging herself deeper. Then she turned back to the crowd. "The communities I come from," Jasmine said, her voice clear, "taught me how to survive systems designed to crush us. They taught me to read between the lines, to listen closely when power tries to tell you who you're allowed to be." In the third row, a woman in a bright red jacket wiped at the corner of her eye. In the back, a college student in a gray hoodie raised his fist. Not high, not loud, but instinctive, powerful. Pam scoffed under her breath, loud enough for the microphones to catch. Everyone heard it. So did Jasmine. But she didn't react. She didn't even blink. Instead, she locked eyes with the camera, speaking now not as a politician, but as a person laying down a truth too sharp to ignore. "If my existence makes you uncomfortable," Jasmine said, her voice steady and unflinching. "Good. Real change never starts with comfort. It starts when you're forced to confront the ugly truths you've been too polite to name." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, weighty. A silence that said, "We hear you. We see you." Pam shifted again in her seat, unsettled. But it didn't matter anymore. Control had already slipped from her grasp. The stage, polished, choreographed, had cracked wide open, and something raw, something real was pouring through. Monica, gathering herself, tried to steer the conversation to safer ground, something about security measures and leak prevention. But Jasmine wasn't done. "Before we talk about policy," she said, voice calm but unwavering, "we need to talk about the dignity of every voice policy affects. When we decide who gets protected and who doesn't, we're deciding whose lives matter enough to defend." From near the front, a young black woman shouted, "That's right," without hesitation. The room stirred, leaning toward Jasmine now, not just politely but fully, bodies and hearts moving her way. Even Monica, who kept a professionally neutral face, couldn't hide the faint glimmer in her eyes. Pam Bondi looked around, realizing, maybe for the first time that night, that the tide had turned. She opened her mouth, but what could she say now? That she didn't mean it? That it was taken out of context? No one was buying it. The cameras had captured everything. Pam's tightening shoulders, Jasmine's rising strength, the audience's steady shift from wary to galvanized. By the time Monica wrapped the segment and sent them to commercial, the narrative wasn't about DOJ policies anymore. It was about power, about pride, about a country being forced to reckon with the ugliness hidden inside its most polished rooms. And when the cameras came back from commercial, the true scope of what had just happened would begin to reveal itself. Across America, from cramped apartments in Detroit to small-town diners in Indiana, people were already buzzing. One cutting insult, intended to diminish a woman, had instead elevated her beyond the podium. But Jasmine Crockett didn't bask in it. She didn't lean back or smirk. She stayed steady, like a river carving stone, slow, certain, impossible to ignore. Monica tossed out the next question, a technical one, meant to move things along. What would reversing journalistic protections mean for free speech? Pam pounced first, almost desperate. "It means responsible journalism will thrive," she said sharply. "It means accountability." But no one cared about scripted talking points anymore. Then Jasmine spoke. "It means fear," she said simply. "It means the people with the least power. Immigrants, workers, single mothers, the wrongly accused. Lose the few voices willing to risk everything to tell their stories." Her words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They rolled out heavy and certain, each syllable sticking like a stone in the gut. Pam fidgeted, tapping her pen against her notes. a small, frantic sound betraying her nerves. Jasmine pressed, on voice gaining momentum like a drumbeat you could feel through the floor. You want to silence leakers? Fine. You want to protect national security? Of course. But you don't get to use that excuse to muzzle truth. You don't get to cherry-pick which whistleblower deserves protection based on how clean their background is or how easily you can pronounce their last name. The crowd stirred again. Heads nodded. A low murmur of agreement rippled through the seats. Sensing the shift, Monica leaned in, asked carefully, Congresswoman Crockett, what would you say to those who believe this move is about preserving order, not suppressing voices? Jasmine didn't hesitate. I would say that order without justice isn't peace, she said. It's oppression wearing a badge. And there it was, the moment, clear, unmistakable. You could see it on the faces around the room. Even the skeptics were leaning in now, hanging on every word. Pam glanced sideways, at Monica, at Jasmine, at the cameras, and for the first time all night, looked like she understood just how badly she'd miscalculated. You could almost see the panic rising in Bondi's chest. The dawning realization that she hadn't just lost the moment, she'd lost the entire narrative. And Jasmine wasn't finished, yet. She leaned forward, bringing it all the way back to where it started. The insult, the attempt to belittle her, the effort to shame her into silence. You don't get to weaponize my background against me, Jasmine said, her voice steady, almost gentle now. Because everything you tried to shame, my upbringing, my community, my fight, that's exactly what made me strong enough to sit here today. The applause that followed wasn't polite this time. It was full-throated, unrestrained. Pam Bondi shrank back in her chair. Jasmine sat up straighter, a quiet force. The balance of power had shifted completely, and there was no going back. The moderators rushed to move to the next topic, sensing the tension boiling over. But it didn't matter. The cameras had already captured it, raw, unfiltered, undeniable. America had seen it live. No edits, no spin doctors to soften the blow. Within minutes, clips began circulating. Within the hour, hashtags caught fire. By nightfall, Bondi's insult had been the spark. Jasmine's response was the wildfire. But the real impact wasn't something that could be contained inside a single room or a single news cycle. By the time the panel wrapped up and the Civic Center lights dimmed, the internet had seized the story with both hands. And it wasn't just political junkies or activists tuning in. It was moms cooking dinner in Boise, truck drivers pulled over at rest stops in Oklahoma, teenagers scrolling through their phones in Phoenix, all sharing clip after clip of Jasmine Crockett standing her ground without raising her voice once. Within 2 hours, your stand with Crockett was trending #1 on Twitter. Press freedom wasn't far behind, but this wasn't just another mindless viral moment, a meme, a fleeting trend. You could feel it. People weren't just entertained, they were moved. On TikTok, videos showed young women of color watching the clip, tears streaming down their faces. On Instagram, artists posted drawings of Jasmine as a warrior, wrapped in the colors of her community. On Facebook, grandmothers shared the footage with captions like, "About time someone said it plain." Even people who knew nothing about DOJ policies understood the heart of it. The insult was simple. The response was unforgettable. Cable. News networks scrambled to catch up overnight. Primetime anchors replayed the moment on a loop. Bondi's insult. Jasmine's silence. Then her calm, blistering takedown. Commentators argued back and forth, but the footage didn't need commentary. It spoke for itself. Meanwhile, Bondi's team scrambled for damage control, releasing a statement claiming she meant no offense, and that her words were taken out of context. Nobody was buying it. If anything, the spin only made things worse because people weren't just angry about what was said. They were angry about why it was said, about the long, ugly history behind casual racism and classism, about how often it went unchallenged in the halls of polished power. Jasmine Crockett didn't release a fiery press statement. She didn't launch a victory tour. She didn't need to. She let the footage speak, and America listened. By the next morning, the clip had been viewed over 25 million times. Major newspapers ran headlines that captured the heart of it. Strength. In silence when composure defeats contempt. Crockett redefines leadership. A lesson in power. Crockett versus Bondi at a coffee shop in Mesa, Arizona. Two strangers struck up a conversation over lattes after seeing the clip on the shop's TV. In sight, a high school government class in Des Moines. A teacher paused the lesson to show her students what courage looked like in real time. Even in spaces where politics usually divided people, there was rare agreement. Leadership wasn't about shouting the loudest. It was about how you carried yourself when someone tried to drag you low. For Jasmine, it was never about becoming a hero. It wasn't about going viral. It was about sending a message, one she had learned a long time ago, sitting at scratched-up desks in overcrowded classrooms, standing in endless government lines alongside tired mothers and crying babies. The TU message was simple. You don't get to tell me I'm small, and if you try, I'll show you exactly how wrong you are. You don't have to change yourself to deserve respect. Meanwhile, Bondi's name kept trending, for all the wrong reasons. Editorials slammed her for exposing the exact kind of biases people like her usually tried to deny. Former colleagues quietly distanced themselves, speaking invitations that once flooded in mysteriously dried up. It was a reckoning she hadn't seen coming. Back in Dallas, Jasmine Crockett sat quietly with her closest friends and advisors, reading through the waves of support pouring in from across the country. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't gloating. She was thinking about what came next. Because a viral moment could be powerful, but only if you knew how to turn it into real change. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't about to let this moment end with applause alone. The Monday after the panel, Jasmine didn't show up on late-night talk shows. She didn't chase flashy interviews or quick headlines. She got to work. Her first stop was a town hall in Bakersfield, California. No fancy catering, no velvet ropes. Just folding chairs squeaking against linoleum floors and coffee served in styrofoam cups. About 300 people packed into the modest community center. Far more than organizers expected. Some wore campaign buttons. Some came straight from work, in t-shirts and jeans. It didn't matter. They weren't there for show. They were there because something about Jasmine's stand had hit them deeper than politics. When she walked in, the room erupted into a standing ovation. No music, no spotlights, just real people clapping until their hands hurt. Jasmine smiled humbly, waved once, and went straight to the microphone. I didn't come here to talk about me, she said. I came here to talk about you, about your right to tell your stories without fear, about your right to question power, even when power doesn't like it. The room fell silent. The only sound was the hum of an old air conditioning unit. She spoke about press freedom, about why independent journalism mattered, especially in communities like theirs where corruption didn't always make headlines, but still ruined lives. She explained that the policies Bondi had defended weren't just political moves. They were direct threats to real people. An older man in the front row raised his hand. Congresswoman, he said, voice trembling slightly. What can we even do about it? Jasmine looked him straight in the eye. You do what you're doing right now, she said. You show up, you listen, you demand better, and you never let anyone tell you your voice isn't smart enough, loud enough, or good enough to matter. Another standing ovation shook the room. By the end of the night, dozens of volunteers had signed up to help push new legislative efforts, protecting whistleblowers, safeguarding journalists, fighting for communities too often left behind. Local newspapers covered it. Regional TV stations aired it. Even national outlets, still buzzing from the viral moment, picked it up, and Bakersfield was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, Jasmine moved from town to town, places that rarely saw national politicians. Modesto, California. Topeka, Kansas. Shreveport, Louisiana. She spoke at churches, high schools, union halls. No teleprompters, no big entourage, just her, a microphone, and the truth. At every stop, the crowds grew. At every stop, the energy sharpened. At every stop, the movement built, not around a single viral moment, but around an idea people could feel in their bones. Respect isn't handed down by power. It's built from the ground up. Meanwhile, back in Washington, D.C., her colleagues started to notice. Bills she introduced to protect press freedom suddenly gained surprising new co-sponsors. Senators who once kept their distance now leaned in when she spoke. Journalists didn't just cover her, they listened. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just surviving a controversy. She was shaping a national conversation. One evening in Springfield, Missouri, after another packed town hall, a young girl no older than 11 approached Jasmine, clutching a homemade sign. Just a piece of cardboard written in big blue marker, "My voice matters too." Jasmine knelt down so they were eye to eye. "It always has," she said softly. "Never forget that." They hugged. Someone in the crowd snapped a photo. Simple, raw, achingly real. By the next morning, that picture was everywhere. It wasn't choreographed. It wasn't manufactured. It was just truth. And it captured better than any headline what Jasmine had been fighting for all along. Not likes, not retweets, not clout. A country where no child, no community, no journalist was treated like. They were disposable. But the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Jasmine Crockett had one more move to make. One that would seal her place not just in headlines but in history. The Capitol building gleamed under the mid-morning sun. On the front steps, reporters clustered together, microphones bobbing, notebooks snapping open. Inside, the air buzzed, not with the usual political chess moves, but with rare, real anticipation. Jasmine Crockett walked through the heavy, double doors wearing a simple navy dress and a pair of well-worn flats. No grand entrance, no camera-ready theatrics. Just her steady presence, real and grounded. At the podium in the main rotunda, she adjusted the microphone once and looked out over the crowd. Congressional colleagues, journalists, activists, all leaning forward, waiting. "I'm not here today because I handled an insult well," she began, her voice calm and even. "I'm here because for too long, too many voices in this country have been taught to stay small when someone tries to shame them into silence." You could hear the scratch of pens across paper, the quiet click of cameras, but no interruptions. Not today. When someone calls you too loud, too rough, or too ghetto, Jasmine continued, they're not judging your worth. They're revealing their own fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of seeing power look different than it used to. Her words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They landed like a steady drumbeat, deep, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Jasmine paused, letting the weight of her message settle in the marble halls. "Today," she said, "I'm introducing the Freedom to Tell Act, a bill that strengthens protections for journalists, for whistleblowers, and for every community brave enough to speak truth when it's easier to stay quiet." This wasn't just a reaction. It wasn't just applause. It was action. Whispers spread among the journalists. One young woman discreetly wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. Another clutched her recorder tightly, nodding. Jasmine laid out the bill clearly. No federal agency could compel a journalist to reveal confidential sources without meeting strict, transparent legal standards. Whistleblowers exposing corruption would be given stronger, federal legal protections. Retaliation against independent media outlets would carry automatic penalties under federal law. It was bold, it was sweeping, and it was exactly what the moment demanded. When she finished, there was no immediate applause, just a collective breath as if the entire room had to catch up to what had just happened. Then the clapping started, slow at first, then swelling, until the great marble rotunda echoed with it. Jasmine Crockett stepped back from the microphone, letting the sound wash over her, but not letting it drown her. She had learned long ago. Applause was nice. Change was better. Reporters rushed forward. Jasmine answered a few questions, posed for a few quick photos, and then quietly made her way down the Capitol steps. At the bottom, an older woman in a floral blouse caught her hand. "Thank you," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for not letting them shrink you." Jasmine smiled, squeezed her hand back, and replied, "Thank you for reminding me why we keep standing." The sun beat down. The world spun on. Inside the capital, political games resumed. Elsewhere, headlines started forming. But something had shifted, because standing tall isn't about getting the last word. It's about holding your ground when someone tries to pull it out from under you, and still having the courage to build something stronger in its place. That's what Jasmine Crockett had done. And whether America realized it yet or not, they had just witnessed a blueprint for a different kind of leadership. One stitched together not with ego or cruelty, but with grit, grace, and an unshakable belief in the worth of every voice. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. No matter who tries to make you small, your voice, your story, your truth, they matter more than you think. Never trade your dignity for anyone's comfort. Speak, stand, stay strong. And if you believe that too, make sure you're subscribed. Because the next story that reminds us what real strength looks like is just around the corner.